The neighborhood I grew up in, it's 6 blocks, 2 blocks long. Everybody knows each other, everybody's close to each other. Kids from my area, we don't leave the neighborhood. We all we got.
I was at work one day and having lunch with ladies, and there were 4 of us at a table, and 3 of us had lost a child to gun violence. 3 out of 4.
I think people are banging their heads against the wall trying to figure out what is causing all of this violence in the city of Chicago. People are frustrated. People are trying to figure out ways to even just stop it on their block.
How can we empower them to create a better experience in their own community? Instead of doing things for people, to do things with people, because the people who you're trying to quote unquote help, they are the ones that need to be empowered to lead themselves. Every week, I'm somewhere with someone who's making a difference.
I think it's important for young people in general to see leaders and people who look like them that they didn't imagine would be in roles that they're in. It's true, you can't be what you can't see. So if you're not exposed to it, how do you even know it exists?
I see small organizations, I see people coming together and really believing that they can be a force for change. Things are changing in this community. People are changing. The minds of the people are changing.
Good afternoon. I'm Archery Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of the Target Area Development Corporation, and it is my great honor and great privilege to welcome you to the Target Area AFC Center. It is my privilege and my honor to introduce the President of the MacArthur Foundation. Please receive Ms. Julia Stasch.
I was just settling in for the long introduction, but that was okay. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you, Audrey, for your hospitality here. It is incredible to be in this place, and I feel so honored. I want to also welcome all of you for coming here for what I hope is a timely and thought-provoking conversation. It's about a topic that we have to keep talking about all the time. But we have to make sure that what we're talking about is not just the cause, but what are the solutions? And what are each of us individually and our organizations doing to contribute to that mosaic of solutions? Now, before my panelists join me on the stage here, I'm going to set the scene a little bit with some information that will not be news to actually many of you in this room. Because before we talk about solutions, we actually have to acknowledge the dual crises of gun violence and a lack of police legitimacy that make this conversation essential and timely. Now, we all know in 2016, Chicago had nearly 800 homicides, a 58% increase over the previous year. But the thing that goes along with that is that at the same time, in the same year, the Chicago Police Department solved only 26% of the murders, the lowest homicide clearance rate in the country. So in early 2017, we were one of several funders that were honored to support the activities of a police accountability task force. And so that task force and the Department of Justice found that the Chicago Police Department unconstitutionally engaged in a pattern of excessive force, offering together more than 100 specific recommendations for change. Now, we also know that the annual number of shootings and homicides in Chicago continues to decline, but still the incidence of it is not acceptable. and I don't have to tell you this, that we have to make sure that we do not become numb to the continued narrative. But we also have to remember that the numbers don't tell the whole story. Now, I've met some people and been discouraged by this, what I'm about to say. They believe that people who live in and work in many of the communities that are the hardest hit, they believe that these residents and organizations are either paralyzed or apathetic. What they don't understand, and they would know if they came to a meeting such as we're having today, or if they met any of you, that there are residents and community leaders and civic and church groups and others who are working every day and every night to make the blocks and the neighborhoods safer throughout the city. What drives those actions and the actions of many of your colleagues is that we realize that we cannot continue to do the same thing, hoping each year is going to be better. So Chicago's philanthropic community is also a piece of what we hope is a solutions puzzle. Now, the MacArthur Foundation, through primarily its Chicago commitment team, the members of whom are here today, our Chicago grant making and investment and partnership is what we want to be partners in, and that is helping to ensure that the city is a place where opportunity is equitable, but most importantly, where justice can thrive. Now, we're also a founding member of the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities, and this is a coalition of more than 40 Chicago funders and foundations that we came together a couple of years ago around the notion that perhaps we didn't each have to fund our own special thing, but that we could come together and align our grant making and our contribution around proven and promising approaches to reducing gun violence. So members of the partnership across the whole array of funders, we've committed to date more than $75 million to provide jobs and supportive services to those most affected by the violence, to hopefully increase police legitimacy and work on reform, to strengthen gun policy, and to support grassroots organizations across 19 Chicago communities for summer events and projects, all of which are geared to foster stronger community bonds, to help crowd out violence, and actually, in some instances, to promote constructive engagement with law enforcement. What I see, each of you sees, and we need to make sure that everybody sees, there is so much effective work taking place in neighborhoods across the city, not just by the organizations that will join me on the stage in a moment, but it is this that gives me, and I hope all of us, a reason to be hopeful, despite the incredibly tremendous challenge our city faces. So, this conversation today is not about me. It's meant to be about you. It's meant to be about the solutions and the commitment and the passion of the individuals that will join me on stage here. So why don't we just dive into that conversation? The bios of each of the panelists is included in your program. But so let me invite Billy and George and Tanya and Teny to the stage so we can get down to conversation. So let's start with a couple of things that are meant to get us all on the same page with a general sense of what each of these organizations is engaged in. So first of all, let's just hear about your work a little bit. Talk about your work, but also what makes your work sort of distinctive or different. So let's start with you, Jorge.
So good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate the invite here. It's a humbling experience. So my work, I work in Humboldt Park, and I've been working in Humboldt Park for 13 years.
Alligator's not your first priority?
Yeah, that alligator's taking all the hype away from a bad weekend, right?
Well,
we're
let's
just
go back
talking
to the
about
important
it.
stuff.
Yes, we're
Yes.
just talking about the alligator too. Hope they catch them. But you know, what we do at also is build relationships, and that I think that's key in our mission to ending violence. We really believe in building community and building community together. And I was once one of those young men in the community that caused a lot of the violence. And I know that me holding myself accountable and others holding me accountable changed my life. And that's what I try to bring to the table every day in my team, is to go out there and let the young people know that, yes, there's going to be challenges and roadblocks, right? But that's not the end of everything, right? Let our lives and our story go through chapters, and I try to model the behavior for, like, okay, I've been there and done it. You know, let's work together and let me walk with you to bring you to that peace and to bring people together. So, you know, in a big nutshell, that's what we do.
So it seems to me what you're talking about how important it is that young people interact with people with whom they can share lived experience. And so they can understand that you understand.
Yes.
What about you, Tanya?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Julia. I want to thank the audience for coming out on a beautiful day. You could be anywhere, but you chose to be here, which says a lot about your commitment. And certainly on the South Side, I'm delighted to be on this side of town, so thanks to the planners. I am the executive director of the West Side Justice Center, and we are a holistic legal aid clinic that provides free services for people in the community, not only on the west side of Chicago and Cook County and Collier counties, but anywhere where people have a need. If I had to encapsulate very succinctly what is unique about what we do and how we do it, is I myself am a native West Sider. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, West Side, in K-Town and in Austin. And because of a lot of what we were facing in our communities, I was actually shuttled outside of the community to go to school, and went to school in River Forest, attended school downtown because of a lot of the challenges that we're facing in our community. But not everybody had that opportunity. The people who work at the West Side Justice Center, we're a very small team of about 3 women warriors, as I like to call us. We are attorneys, we are jailhouse attorneys, we are community members, and within that there's a great wealth of strength from not only our shared experiences, but our expertise that we've been able to develop from that. We are located in a building on the corner of California and Harrison, which also makes us unique in the fact that we are in the community. So oftentimes when we talk about community-based and community-facing, those are organizations that often happen not to be in the community, but we actually are located physically in the same communities that we serve. We are an amalgamation of what I like to refer to of social justice champions and do-gooders. So within that building, there's not only our not-for-profit, but we also are home to 4 other not-for-profit organizations: the Chicago Community Bond Fund, the Bail Project, Moms United Against Violence and Incarceration, as well as the First Defense Legal Aid. We are home to 2 small not-for-profit or rather solo practitioners who practice law, as well as 2 mid-sized law firms. So that enables us to have a very wide bench of support, as well as very deep and a wealth of knowledge that we are able to leverage for free to support the clients that we serve. In addition to that space, we also have about 6 entrepreneurs which are in our building physically. And those people provide services that are in and around this social justice space. So there's a realtor, credit repair, private investigator, translation services, all of these types of services that support our clients in other ways. And then lastly, I would say for us, we have transformed the model of holistic legal services and expanded that, instead of it merely just meaning wraparound services as we were accustomed to using the word. Holistic for me and for us means that it is rooted in the community and that the members have equal authorship over the solutions as we create them together. And as we uplift one individual, we are uplifting families and communities at the same time. We believe that that's what holistic is really all about. So we are trying to change that model upside down and repower communities every day.
I love that definition. Billy, talk a little bit about inner city.
Good afternoon. I'm the case manager at Iman, our Green Reentry department. What we do at Iman is we foster health, wellness, and healing in a holistic way. And what I mean by that is that we understand that violence doesn't happen in a silo. What leads to these things that we see playing out is decades of neglect, disinvestment, and trauma that pretty much leads to violence. Through our Green Reentry department, what we have done is basically build power within our model through job training, education, behavioral health, trauma-informed, artistic expression, and it, basically we come together and we create a space what we consider to be an intergenerational space where we bring older men who have made mistakes with younger men who are basically facing certain circumstances that could lead them down the same path. So I believe that that's what makes our program pretty much successful.
Has some of the same ethos as also does.
Yes.
Teny, talk a little bit about what you do.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I grew up in a different neighborhood. It was the Middle East. And like the founder of Iman, who is a Palestinian, I'm an Israeli. We're good friends and colleagues. It can happen. And I got exposed to violence reduction and intervention in Boston during the crack epidemic. I came to school there. And I got involved with the Pentecostal church that in the middle of really a big crisis in Boston. And this was also the West Times in Chicago and Los Angeles, everywhere around the country. And then I was recruited by a Catholic church to Rhode Island in 2001 to start the Institute of Nonviolence there. The first visitors from Chicago came in 1999 to Boston and spent a week with me and with our team. So our field is fairly small around the country. We work with each other. And I was asked to come here and help mainly on collaborations and breaking silos. So at my age now, I'm a big cheerleader for the field of outreach. It's the most beautiful field. A lot of courageous people are my heroes every day. And the people who help us, like legal aid. Just yesterday, we had two of our participants asking for representation. Today, our COO was in court in Skokie, so this is a constant need. The Institute, we're based on Kingian nonviolence. We do outreach and victim services, case management, but we base and we teach Kingian nonviolence. So we replace some of the language and we channel the anger into actually activism and the belief in nonviolence and building the beloved community. In the beloved community, everyone belongs. Our young people are not to be kicked to the side, the 0.3% that many of us rejected. They're to be beloved, as well as law enforcement. We're empathetic to the stress they go through. We're empathetic to a lot of other systems and try and bring all of us together towards it. What I believe is, I want to beat New York. We want to have Chicago be safer than New York. I'm an all Red Sox fan and now Cubs, so the Yankees are the target, and we're gonna make Chicago a safer place. It's a beautiful city. It's a wonderful city. There's a lot of smart, capable people. We got to get our coordination right and the right amount of dosages to do this intervention. The hyper-segregation here is something to behold. People told me when I came in, I said every American city is segregated, but they were right. This is different.
Mm-hmm. So one of the words that comes up frequently in conversations about solutions related to violence and interactions between community and law enforcement, and even amongst organizations that are working on the problem either together or in parallel, is this word of trust. And the notion of trust and how essential it is for any progress. So from each of your perspectives, how do you go about sort of building trust between and among the organizations that you're working with, and then even between your organizations and community and law enforcement? Who'd like to take a stab at that first?
I'll jump in and talk about first the relationship between our organizations and the community, because I think that's where it initially starts. We were founded very organically at the Westside Justice Center in response to people literally coming in and telling us what they wanted as far as services were concerned. So we didn't rely upon a study that said, this number of people live in this area and this is what they look like. We can see what they look like. We didn't rely upon a survey to figure out that we were in not only a legal desert, but a food desert and an education desert, and you name it. We know that because we live and work there. And we allowed the community to tell us the kinds of services that they wanted, and we would like to believe that we will evolve with the community as those needs change. So that trust has to first be built block by block, neighbor by neighbor. I've got to be able to trust George so that I'm not stealing from him, even though I'm hungry. I might ask for a cup of sugar instead. That trust and that same level, at that granular level, has to start between our organizations and the people we serve. Then we can begin to reach across the aisle and say, let me come visit your place and see what you're doing. You come visit mine and see if we're on the same page. And then how can we leverage those relationships together to then serve the community in more impactful and sustainable ways? By the time we get to adding government and law enforcement and systems, then we've done the harder work and we continue to circle back and then invite others in. I actually have a childhood friend that I grew up with in K-Town who's now a police commander. So even at the same time, while there are conversations that may seem antithetical between the police and our communities, I know that's one of the good guys because I know how he approaches his work in his community because he's where I'm from. And I think when we start at that very, micro level, one neighbor to another, block by block, organization by organization, then we can enter a deeper conversation with law enforcement.
George, what about you?
So I would say for me, building the relationships again, right? So for us, I've been doing this work for a while, and the Peace Academy is something that just came out in front when you asked that question. So the Peace Academy brings together, all the outreach agencies, to train and talk about best practices. And I think those spaces is where you build trust. There's a lot of the outreach workers that known each other for many, many years, and the work is changing now. But those conversations is where you build trust amongst organizations. Because when they're going out on the field and they're mediating in situations or putting their lives on the line, they have to have trust, right? And so it's built in those rooms, having those hard conversations and pushing each other to understand what violence looks like, right? It doesn't look the same everywhere in every community. And even what gender-based violence looks like, what domestic violence looks like all these things that we talk about in those spaces helps build trust when we're out in the community and we're seeing them. Then we can help the community and build that trust there.
So what you're saying is that it's possible for outreach workers who work in different organizations to actually feel that they're part of a larger community of individuals who are seen as increasingly part of a profession, which actually then maybe lays the groundwork for a different view of outreach workers by law enforcement. Yep. What about Iman?
Yes, I'd like to basically echo what George said in terms of the Peace Academy. Because the Peace Academy has brought together these agencies that's been doing work for years. And we have basically invited law enforcement in just to understand the perspective that this is real work. It should be professionalized. It should be recognized. A lot of time we don't get the credit out front when they talk about the numbers and how they're being reduced. It's the outreach workers that are actually doing this hard work. Also, just sitting in this space, Target has been a long-standing partner with Iman for years through UCRO. When you do this type of work and you engaging with different organizations and you understand what they're about, another thing that's good, if we don't have to compete for the same dollars, how can you sustain work when you only living off a 2-3 year contract and guys pretty much looking to sustain their life? What are they going to do after these contracts are over? Mm-hmm. This work has to be sustainable. You can't expect this work and people to trust the type of work that's being done with the people that they're utilizing if after 2 or 3 years, this person is out of work and he has to find another way to feed his family, and he may do something that may not be acceptable in society's eyes, and then they just tear down the whole industry because, he's gotten caught up in something. So,
Teny, talk a little bit about trust from your perspective.
It's really one of the core things of what we all care about. We take trust, building trust generally is difficult, but think about law enforcement and people who used to be the absolutely opposite side, right? And communities, there hasn't been trust in 400 years between the African American community and police in many ways. So we got to know the history. We got to know both sides, the hurt and their opinions. So when we listen, so last night I was asked to sit with the captain on one-on-one, and we sat for 2 hours and talked about our childhood. He grew up on the West Side. You cannot be efficient. You got to spend the time so people can figure each other out. What are we about? He needs to know that I care about his officers, but I will not compromise our outreach workers. Police rely on information. You're not going to get it from us. And so some of it, trust, is built by very, very honest conversation, right? I had a tactical lieutenant a year ago ask me, if you know about a serious crime, will you tell us? And I said, Lieutenant, these are your officers. He asked me in front of his officers, what's your first job? He said, to protect them. I said, I'm not God. The outreach workers I hire do not belong to me. I only pay them a salary. I'm responsible for their safety. So you're not going to get that information. You keep doing what you do. We keep doing what we do. We got to trust and understand each other, but also where we're separate. And people, by and large, when you talk with them directly, are comfortable with that, and we build that relationship. Chicago police is not going to change through lawyers and police reform. It's a very important part. But every city I worked in, it's really, we model for them a different view, and we got to be patient. When you're always hunting people, and we are left to be social worker and grief counselor, which the police now are, in neighborhoods that have been disinvestment, and you're told contain the problem, you're going to develop a certain point of view. So we are reintroducing them to fall in love in the young people we work with. And it's a process, and we understand them. We cannot just scream at them to start loving the young people we work with. But we can infect them with the love and show some subtleties that this is not just a person with this record. And I believe in that process, and the partnership has allowed us now to be on, the body is on the field, to actually do the day-to-day interaction. We try and infect with goodness. Both the young people are in conflict, law enforcement, and every other system. Judges, today a judge gave a big compliment to one of our outreach workers and released someone to work, etc., with no restriction, which otherwise they said they would not have done.
So you've talked a little bit about what you do. Reflect back a little bit on how you may have done your work in the past. And what have you learned from that now informs your work today? What do you know now that you didn't know in the past? And how do you think about that for the future?
I think trauma, better understanding trauma, being trauma informed, how trauma plays a part even back to the elementary level of kids just acting out, and the institution not understanding how to deal with a young person who's experiencing pain. Basically, he just get labeled, or stigmatized, and the pain isn't addressed. A child will never be able to interpret or let you know exactly what's going on. They just act out, and we don't have the capacity to deal with that. So what happens is this child is just pushed along, and at a certain point in his life, when he becomes a young man, that trauma is playing out on a whole nother level, to whereas you see people killing each other, hurt people. So we have to become more trauma-informed so we can start teaching heal people to heal people. And that way, I think that has better informed the work that we do today. When you start to see how trauma really is the underlying factor to the systemic problem that we see playing out in the street violence.
How does this notion of more sensitivity to trauma play out in the services that you provide, Tanya?
So we often see many of our attorneys, our intake workers, all of our staff impacted by what we refer to as vicarious trauma, right? So when you are sitting opposite people who are coming to you with their problems day after day after day after day, there's a certain amount of vicarious trauma that you also experience. And as we see many mental health services dry up for our community, there are even far fewer for those of us who do that work. We take all of that home and then go somewhere. Just like judges do, just like police officers do, we're doing the same thing. And so I am very much an advocate for increased professional development, increased mental health services for the practitioners who do this work. As attorneys, we have all sorts of, employment assistance programs that are supposed to help us if we, fall into drug abuse or substance abuse, but nobody really talks about how you are impacted by just helping people and what that feels like. And especially when we are dealing with clients who are facing very violent circumstances, we won't even begin to talk about the formerly incarcerated when they come back to our communities with the stories of the, hellacious circumstances that they've lived under and how that impacts us. So that's another level to exactly what you're talking about.
So George, I assume that you and the folks that you work with, you encounter the consequences of trauma all the time. How do you think about that in your direct interactions with individuals?
So how do I think about it? So I don't never put my own judgment. I always come from a lens of myself and speak in terms of what I seen. And it's very impactful, right? I grew up in an era and in a culture where if A happens, B happens. What I mean by that is if someone does something to me, I have to retaliate and do it back, right? And seeing it over and over again as a child within the home, right? In my own house with my family members was very traumatic to me, right? Growing up. And so I see that every day, all day. And the work that we do at also is we're trying to push this conversation now of violence in the home.
As where it starts.
Yes. Violence in the home, we see it every day, all day play out in the streets, right? And all that trauma. And I think it's an important conversation to start pushing because that's where it's born, right? I learned how to do negative things at home. And then I played it out in the streets when I was younger. And that's what we see nowadays,
And not to cut you off, I think we have to think even deeply about that, even more deeply about, even when we use the word violence, even when we use the word about, I see violence and so that's what I do. We are smarter than that. We can think more deeply about what that looks like. And it's not always a gun. It's not always a weapon. Sometimes it's the way I talk to you, my abusive language towards you that begins to shape and frame how I handle conflict. I'm also a mediator for the Center for Conflict Resolution, and we do a lot of work in underrepresented courtrooms. But we also do a lot of work with private entities who come to the table and say, we just can't figure this out. We just don't have the tools to address conflict resolution. So when our court systems begin to welcome other diversionary programs like mediation instead of me against you in front of a judge and one of us loses, then we really begin to put some power and some force behind us saying there are other alternatives that we can teach. We hear a lot of language around restorative justice now, and it's kind of like collateral consequences. It's language that has become very diluted because we might all mean something very different by restorative justice when we say that word. But there's some really good work out there that's being done, and when we begin to actually invite that type of work, those options into our centers and into our programs in a meaningful and intentional way, then some of these alternatives are present for people who have only seen one way. And when we stop vilifying the people that we see acting out in a certain way and actually begin to embrace them in the same way that Teny talks about loving our neighbor, then we can start to be part of the solution together.
So each of you has talked about what you do and your vision for trust. But talk a little bit about what are the barriers that you personally encounter or your organization encounters that keep you from being as effective as you know you need to be. Teny, to start with you.
So this is the first time, because of the partnership and Community Partners for Peace and Ready, that worrying about money has become a second worry. In Boston and in Providence, I always had to worry about that, and I felt like I'm a general in the field that has to fly back to Washington every 2 weeks and have to do a dog and pony. And Chicago is notorious for the defunding that happen every summer. So when we are funded somewhat properly, we can really be the surgeons or whatever the professionals that we are. And really, I haven't had a break, I think, in 10 days, right? And that's fine. It should be that. I'm loving what I'm doing with my team. We were with also out on the west side most of the time, a few times in back of the yard with our team in Precious Blood. And it's fine because we can focus. There's a lot of minute details we have to pay attention to. So not having us run across million fields is really helpful, knowing that I got a protection now of foundations, other layers, there's now a city office of violence. So other people take care of some other things that we can focus on where we are. We're all at different levels, we're important to contribute. When I was almost shot in Boston in the early 90s by a 15-year-old defending a 21-year-old that was high out of his mind and was in the wrong neighborhood. The trauma treatment was, I called my supervisor, my friend, we met at Dunkin' Donuts at 11 at night and we had a coffee. We lost 75% of the staff in Boston in 2 years. We got paid $18,000. I got evicted twice. So when I had a chance to run something in Providence, I said, my job now is to take care of the field, of the people who do the work. They'll take care of the young people. And that informs what we do now in CP4P, I think, and Ready. We have loans to staff that are interest-free. That reduces stress. Crises happen left and staff. If we're asking them to respond 24 hours a day, who takes care of them? All kind of things. The state intervene, parole, fines, million things. You gotta be relentlessly loyal to your staff. When things don't go quite as well because people have setbacks and stresses, can you help them through with advocacy? And then using the clouds we have, and now we do that. Chicago will win. We now have access all the way for people like you to the mayor. That brings us clout. We're just outreach organization. We deal with the 0.3% of population, but that is the 0.3% that stops Chicago from developing. And we gotta invest in that, but we need clout. And now we got that through those structures. So that makes us more effective. It leverages what we hear from our team up all the way up so things can start happening. They wanna see results. On trust, a lot of young people in the neighborhood, and people said when I came, wow, Teny, some people treat you really rough. I said they better. Look at the way I look the way I talk. Why wouldn't they be suspicious? People said, are you going to be a university which will go unnamed? Did you come and do a study here for 2 years and leave the neighborhood? So loyalty and knowing that people were let down before. My biggest fear is to have to let down staff because of funding. That is a form of loyalty. I'm committing you to the ground. I need to make sure you have some stability. You talked about a 2 to 3 year grant. So we need to understand when we're trying to repair the damage we've done with lack of stability, like those are really affect people. I have someone who is now in federal prison who was laid off in 2005 as an outreach worker in Chicago. Purely because of that, he could have stopped 5 murders in the last 3 years for us in Austin. He's now costing $700,000 till he's going to finish. To the taxpayer, useless. But it's for something old when he wasn't paying.
Are there other types of barriers beyond the stable funding base that lets you actually do the work? Are there other kinds of barriers? Any community barriers? Any political barriers? Anything like that we should know about?
I want to just speak on something that I know is an issue with us. You know, we have young men in our program that's there for 8 hours a day, and then they go back to the communities that they come from and still face the challenges of what they're dealing with. And I have a young man who was shot 21 times. He survived that. He woke up 3 months later, and it took him 2 years to walk, but he fully recovered. But then he also caught a gun case 6 months ago. And now he's facing an armed habitual case from 6 to 30 or 85%, only because he lives in the same house that he lived in when he was shot 21 times. You know, housing is a problem for us. We have a housing component. If we can expand our housing program to offer these young men, you know, a safer community, because we're stabilizing blocks. That's what we do, Iman. We renovate houses, we stabilize blocks, and we change communities. But unfortunately, we have men like him that have to go back to the same community and where his life has been almost taken, and he's still under this threat every day. We have partnering organizations calling us every day with the same concerns for their young men. Do we have enough housing? Fortunately, we do housing. Unfortunately, we don't have enough housing to help provide for these men, as well as creating opportunities outside of the city of Chicago, which is another problem, because we done had 200,000 African Americans just leave the city, which has affected, you know, stimulating our economy where we don't become stronger, we become weaker. So
I bet you encounter this issue of housing every day with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And most definitely with the population who's reentering, because there are immediate needs that they face immediately when they get out of prison is I must find a job and I must find housing. At the same time, I have little old ladies almost equally every day who are losing their houses due to building code violations, 5-figure water bills, and are forced to leave where they are living. And I would love to convert those into, you know, viable housing opportunities for my other clients. The mechanisms are not always there. I would be disingenuous if I did not underscore what Teny said about funding, because it is important. And while there are certainly other barriers, it certainly undergirds our ability to do what we do. My son is a rising senior at Stanford. He is studying film and received a $7,500 stipend for just the summer so that he could live wherever he wants to live and not have to be worried about studying. So that's his research grant. That $7,500 could mean so much to one of my clients, right? So it's that kind of inequity that we don't often pay attention to. To directly answer your question, there are lots of hidden barriers that not only the community is not aware of, but oftentimes our elected officials and those who are in a position to do something about it. Housing and jobs, we know, are the ones that we see all the time. Education and skills transfer. But access even to justice, access even to legal services is one of those barriers that is often misunderstood or not often understood at all. And so when we as a community can better understand what it really takes for somebody to get back on their feet, then we're less likely to point the finger at why don't they want that job? Well, maybe that job, the one that's being handed out, is not really enough to sustain not only him, but his family. Maybe that job that you're accused of not wanting is not enough for that mom who left her children, who left her sister, who left her grandmother. She can't come back and now just pick up where she left off. So sometimes it's just a lack of a full understanding and appreciation of what it takes for people to be successful in order for us to uplift and elevate our families and our communities. And I think we could do a better job of that.
So it seems to me that there's actually a lot going on right now. You know, we have the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities. We have the Invest campaign. We have the campaign, the 399 campaign. We have all the activities of individual organizations working alone or in concert with others. So maybe we have the meat to be able to cohere around a more comprehensive strategy. And so the mayor has committed to centering anti-violence activities in the new Office of Public Safety. So put on your designer hat for a moment and say that if actually Mayor Lightfoot came to you as a group and said, all right, what does this office look like? What are we doing? What are our priorities? What's most important for us to do to not only help you, but to help you be part of a comprehensive strategy? Why don't we start with you, George?
So I was saying, it almost goes back to your last question, which is around the trust and the barriers, right? It's understanding outreach and building the professional development that we're trying to build and the professional understanding that we're trying to build around outreach. So, you know, with law enforcement and some individuals in the city, they might see myself, Billy, and others that used to be formerly involved and been incarcerated and still involved, right? They're like, how can they go out in the community and build these relationships and stop violence? They must be still involved in a gang. They must be. And we have to have these deep conversations and understand how we utilize our skill and our relationships that have been built forever since we've been kids and grew up in the neighborhood. And I visited Los Angeles with a group, with Teny and a bunch of city officials. And that's what I've seen in Los Angeles, and it shocked me. I walked in a room, and we're with city officials, outreach workers, and the first, just how you asked me, introduce yourself, right? And they introduced themselves, and they were like, I'm a blood from Harvard Park, and and it threw me back. Because if we would do that in Chicago, oh my God, it's over with. So understanding just the field and understanding how we can build that up so that we can support outreach and we can understand the relationships built. Like, you can still go in the community even once you were involved and still help. It doesn't mean that you're involved in street activity. So.
But I think this goes back to something that Teny said, which was people need to believe more in the humanity of other people and the ability of people to change and to reach for their own potential. And so as long as people in law enforcement don't actually see the humanity in the people that they interact with, that's a barrier to the kind of cross-sectoral work that I think is going to be the most important. Yep.
Just like George said, it's a good thing that the Peace Academy has presented an opportunity to have that space for law enforcement to come in to see the type of work that's being done. But we still got laws on the books that prevent men like George and myself to actually just get out there and try to help stop the violence on a level to where they look at it, if you can stop it, you can get it started. Oh. So, they have a law called the state RICO law now, that you can actually be prosecuted if they feel that you have any involvement to some degree with this street organization who has committed certain crimes. You can be charged and sent to prison. When they see you in this way of never changing, then you'll always be looked at as not having the credibility of really doing work that's very much effective. I think we all seen the numbers of the impact of outreach within the city of Chicago and the communities that's been heavily affected by gun violence. To some degree, you have to recognize that, and you have to give men like myself and George the opportunity to come out and do this work, and not just think that you're going to be around 6 months later and then you back in the street. This work, since 1965, we all know there hasn't been under 400 homicides in the city of Chicago. So that's 53 years, of nothing less than 400 homicides. It's not going to take, like I said earlier, a grant for 2 or 3 years that's going to address this issue. This had to be a 15, 20-year vision.
So if we were to articulate this as a task or a charge to the Mayor's Office of Public Safety and the anti-violence efforts, my takeaway is, from what you said, is that we ought to see what barriers can be removed to make it possible for the people that are motivated and best positioned to actually work with young people and others to make sure you can actually do the job. I think that's an important thing. Teny, what would you say would be a top priority for the office?
So I have a list.
Oh, okay. Give us a couple.
Let's start with the young people who are not involved. Take the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club outside of violence reduction. Between the Parks Department, Boys and Girls, and YMCA, map the city of Chicago, do what Harlem Children's Zone did. Every kid can walk into one of those positive activities, after school activity and day activity. Because that's the feeder into the people. We deal when young people fail. We can turn the fire down, but if it constantly feeds from failure for young people who are not getting educated and don't have anything to do, there's always people around the young people we are trying to tackle. And you drive through the West Side and parts of the South Side, the amount of young people with not enough to do is staggering. So you got to do both, right? You got to in the past, those bread and butter organizations really helped raise kids, and they got away from it partially because of philanthropy model, because government got away from funding them. So now they got to chase with all kind of boutique program, but they're really bread and butter. I am a member of the Y. There's not a lot of the kids who really need that who are members of the Y. So I would map the city and make sure every kid can do that. So that would be one priority. For our field, thank you. For our field, build the outreach, and now CRED is mapping with the rest of us where the gaps. So let's say all the gaps are filled with outreach. On outreach now, build trauma services, victim services. Try and keep as much of the workers to be from the community. Because obviously you need some professional mental health, etc. Sometimes you will bring, but make sure the core person who brings goodness and services, the broker of services, is a community member, because that brings power. Right? And we are very protective that outreach worker and victim services are the ones who bring the services and make the connections, because they're seen as ambassadors of good, and it's rehabilitating for them. So keep building on that. We got to have the hospitals in synchronization. At the moment, at 2 hospitals, I won't mention which, victims are waiting for their family's loved one in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. We got shot at Stroger parking lot. I did mention one. Sorry, I didn't mean to. But it's impossible. This is the worst moments in people's life. They need to have a room. There need to be water, clinician helping them. Like if I find out I have cancer, there's going to be a whole treatment in the hospital, how I get to break the news, how my partners is. We need to do the same. Every moment should be a humanizing moment, even the worst moment. So that's the next layer of trauma. Employment. There's now ready in Chicago, a few of us, so we got to develop more of that. The disinvestment has been so deep. We got to do pre-employment if we are realistic, 18 months pre-employment. People are not quite ready to go. We got to work with employers. We cannot afford not to hire young people. So there's some root causes that need to happen.
I'm making an appointment for you with the mayor.
Thank you. I would say another difference between the East Coast and Chicago. The Tribune wrote in 2010, looking back, a summary from Martin Luther King, that the same blocks that are empty for the last 50 years are still empty. Did we not hear of CDCs in this city? You know, in the East Coast, there were 11,000 kids cleaning.
Well, actually, CDCs started here.
Okay, so they kind of fell apart, I think, because we have a lot of empty lots. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but
I think you're wrong. But
there's
keep
no
going.
empty lots in Boston and in Providence anymore. The Community Development Corporation rebuilt everything. And that will be the opportunity you were talking about. We need our young people engaged in rebuilding their own communities.
So, designing the office?
For me, it's less about what the actual model looks like and recognizing that there's lots of ways to victory. My personal hashtag is Bake a Bigger Pie. We have to be far more inclusive about the different models that we see as viable. We have to start measuring outcomes differently than we have in the past. It's not only about how many butts are in the seat and how many pamphlets we pass out, but it's the lasting impact that we can have on a person's life. And how do we measure that in a way that translates into increased resources over time? And as my brother here said next to me, you know, being able to sustain programs, not just for 2 or 3 years, but then recognizing that to truly be successful in some of this programming, we have to allow it to work for 10, 15, or even 20 years and study that over time in a way that makes sense to the people that are being impacted. I would also add that there are certain factors I think should be a part of every model. One is mental health. We are just woefully inadequate when it comes to addressing mental health in communities that are Black and brown especially. We are still suffering disproportionately in some of our communities by the impact of mental health, and we are still trying to address it in silos. And addressing mental health has to be part and parcel and part of the fabric of any type of program or model to truly be effective. We talk about PTSD as it relates to people who go off to war, but we don't talk about PTSD for the people who are walking around these streets. And we have to make that a priority. And then wrapping all of those things together, There is some amazing work that gets done at a community level. I talked about granular level. We have to start adequately shining a light on community-based programs that might have 2 or 3 staff people, that might only have a budget of $100,000, and making sure that they get connected with other organizations so that they can leverage their resources in the communities in which they reside. You cannot talk enough about the trust that is developed when you have a person who's from the community, like we are, who can then be able to help the people generations later. And so I think those would be the elements that I would like to see in any program design, bake a bigger pie.
So I think my takeaway, tell me if I'm right here, my takeaway is that we're still talking, you're all talking sort of within this much broader definition of the word holistic. And what you're saying is, should not the Mayor's Office of Public Safety actually be thinking about being a center of gravity, not only within government, but drawing all of the resources and assets across the agencies and the departments so that they can work together to provide what they do to the community in a coordinated, deep dive way where it makes sense, and other ways in communities where the need is not so great. So if they just look at themselves as, sort of the interaction with law enforcement, this will be a huge missed opportunity, because as skeptical as we are about some of the things that go on in government, there's still a huge concentration of assets and services and things that can be brought to bear.
Absolutely. We've got to repower the communities where we already know there is power. People know what they want. They know what they need. They just don't always have the mechanisms to be able to access those. So at the Westside Justice Center, when we talk about repowering versus empowering, that's exactly what we're talking about, is being able to highlight those pathways to success and give people access to those pathways so that they can be the co-authors of their own blueprint. And I think when we start to think less about we are the purveyors and the owners of all the knowledge and all that is good, and we're going to give it to the community and begin to actually uplift the community, listen to them, and then, repower the circuit board, then we can start to see the lasting change that I think we're all desirous of.
Thanks. So several individuals actually online, when they responded, when they RSVP'd for the event here, they had an opportunity to pose a couple of questions. So let me ask a couple of those questions that came in advance. And so it's really interesting the way our vocabulary related to violence centers on men and centers on young men. And so what can we do to increase the focus on women and girls, because they're part of the individuals and families and communities that suffer consequences? And so whether it's young girls engaging in behavior that is not constructive, or their collateral damage to the trauma, how do we make sure that we're looking holistically at young men and young women?
I don't mind. So it's the gender-based lens that we talked about earlier. And I think it was, George, you actually brought it up first, right? We know about gender-based violence. We know about the criminalization of women when they find themselves on the wrong side of gender-based violence, and what that means when you take a woman out of the home, incarcerate her for 5, 10, 15 years, and what that looks when she comes back. We've got to make this a conversation that not only women are being the champions of, but men and women alike are beginning to speak up on that. There are wonderful organizations like Polished Pebbles, which is a girls mentoring organization that works towards being able to help young women of color find their voice in ways that they haven't before, that will give them job readiness skills, but also give them an opportunity to develop their leadership skills. Many of our organizations need to start being run by women, and we have to start seeing women in the boardrooms of places where it counts. There's been legislation just here recently in the past session that said every corporation that's headquartered in Illinois should have X number of women on their board. We have got to start taking that type of commitment seriously at all levels. So not just in the social services space, not just in outreach, but at every opportunity, we have to start looking at our problems through not only the typical, hegemony and patriarchal way that we're accustomed to, but we also have to realize it's not just my voice any more than me as a Black woman is the only champion of Black causes that face Black women, it's all of our responsibilities to speak out in rooms where we see injustices.
That's terrific. Here's a question, I think, from someone in the group here. This is really a tough topic, and violence, the report, the every weekend report, and the drumbeat, and the concern about the summer, and the summer leaking into the rest of the year. And we do not yet see the contours of a comprehensive plan through which we can hold ourselves as a city accountable. So maybe each of you could just speak for a moment to how do you stay hopeful? Because you have to be hopeful, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So talk a little bit about that.
For me, when I look at the news and I see that stuff, that's not what I see every day in my community. So last week was different, right? There was something going on in the city, but I see a lot of wins and a lot of gains in our community and the work that we're doing, and all of our partners, our great partners in Humboldt Park and across the West Side. So for me, I'm on the ground level. I see the wins versus what media, they come out and try to put a story and kind of put a negative connotation to it. I'm on the ground level and I see the wins.
You see it
I see it differently. And someone mentioned here, it's a long game. And if we just want to talk about, having a bad day or a bad weekend versus our long strategy and what we're trying to do, then I think we're hurting ourselves. So I don't try to look at that because it upsets me. It doesn't discourage me. It upsets me because we don't have enough positive stories and positive things that are going on in the media. It's always negative.
So that's another question that came up, which is, what can we do together to ensure that the media has a more nuanced understanding of communities and passion and persistence and the bravery of individuals who are working day to day?
I think that's an easy one. We have so many mechanisms to get information out there that it's astounding. When I went back to graduate school after 40, I was allowed to use a laptop, if not forced to, while the instructor was speaking. That would have been unheard of when I came up in school originally, so many years ago. It was like, listen to the teacher, take notes. There are wonderful opportunities that are out there that young people especially are using in very positive ways, and we have to extol and reward those. What comes to mind immediately, there's a wonderful magazine out called Tribe, Tribe, 2 young women, journalism majors from Medill at Northwestern, women of color, who are putting out the kind of news and information that impacts the millennial generation and also speaks to social justice. And so when we allow ourselves to use the tools that are already out there, as well as support and uplift those that are coming and emerging, I think we have an opportunity to tell a different story. We become the authors and the owners of our own narrative, and making sure that we push those out there and don't wait for somebody else to come and tell our story.
That's,
Yeah, I think Monday morning, when you turn on the news and you hear about, a real bad weekend, there's no human content in that, but when you come to, I can go back to an event we had a couple of weeks ago. We partnered up with Contextos, and we had young men in our program who became published authors. We had people that was invited, but they're not talking about this. They're not putting this out for people to understand that these are young men who have stories that go beyond just, their violent experience or the fact that they have been victims or perpetrators of violent crimes. They have kids. They have people that love them. They're things that they value. And when we can help them to understand the value and who they are, then you see the value, they see the value in themselves, you see the value in them. And they're not just going to be defined by what you see on the news Monday morning. It's a bigger story behind that. But to sensationalize violence in our community, it leads people to think that this is how everybody is. So you don't give people an opportunity to be hopeful. I'm hopeful, just like Jorge said. I don't see that every day. I see these young men, just like the young man who was shot 21 times. This is one of the most dynamic young men in our program, and I hate to see him go away for 30 years of his life because he just want to live, So there is hope. You just can't believe the hype, so to speak.
Teny.
So I will defend the media, and then I will talk about hope, okay? So full disclosure, I'm dating a Tribune reporter who I loved. But the relationship I had with Charlie Radin in the Boston Globe, I had it with a slew of reporters in Providence. Look, how many people here subscribe? Good. We live in a democracy. I was just at Yale Law School with a conference on radicalism and the internet and fake news. This is a fight for our values, for everything. So you don't get free information. Smart people, I deal with violence. Who is watching housing? Who is watching how the roads are being fixed, expenditures? Someone needs to be knowledgeable and do that and educated. So we need to support startups, but we also need to support what looks like boring, established organizations that are doing the day-to-day slug. And you know what? The media will admit they got some of the gang violence in the 90s wrong, like all of us did. African-American politicians, the police, academicians. We all are learning that we made mistakes on incarceration. It says some people were really visionary, many people were not. So we need to also, like we want to change the police and outreach and professionalize it, we got to work with the media. I always had an open door with the media and transparency because they tell the larger public that I cannot reach what is the closest to the truth that you can understand. So we got to also welcome them, and we got to read the day to day. You know, there will be a story on every shooting that happened, but a good story takes probably 90 days to assemble. Go and interview, meet people, etc. So we got to be careful that we're not helping the elements of society that said everyone is lying, but because that destabilizes democracy. On hope, you know, I think there were a few days, the past 14 days. There were 2 nights when I got home at like 11 or so, and I really did just go to sleep. I was kind of depressed and overwhelmed, just overwhelmed with what we've seen. But I run in the morning. I love showing up at the office in the morning when the young people are coming. So we had a young man come without a shirt yesterday. And I've seen him on my bicycle on Madison in Austin the night before. I was like, you're still dressed the same, meaning you don't have a shirt. Went to my car, got him a shirt. They fill me with hope. And I've done this now for 29 years. People like Billy and George, who are in my field of outreach, and you as an activist who I don't know yet, those are the most inspiring. This is, to me, when you think about patriotic and heroes, I'm still in awe. What they face, what they do. So I'm now really an older cheerleader, and so that keeps me hopeful, because there's amazing people in this country and in the neighborhood. When people ask me sometimes in the suburb, yes, it's nice that you want to solicit help for the neighborhood, but why are they not helping themselves? I love that question. I'm so ready for it. Because so many people in the neighborhood every day are meeting and tackling so many issues. I'm still in awe. I'm doing it just because, how can you not? Because there's so many heroes in the neighborhoods every day fighting against impossible odds. My family, I never had grandparents because of the Holocaust. I thought it was the biggest disaster in the world. I now know the people who have faced longer, and I'm not comparing disasters. I want to be clear about that. But the resilience is still amazing to me every day. When you go to a funeral and people celebrate life, I'm still in awe, and I've been through hundreds of those. So you got to be hopeful.
So here's a final question sort of for each of you. How do we convince people who are not directly affected by violence? How do we convince them that this matters to them? This is a big question for the city. I'm not calling. I'm letting you.
I'll start. So let's start with capitalism. The GDP of Chicago can be...
Settle in, apparently.
What?
Settle in here. Let's start with capitalism. Okay.
Let's start with capitalism. This city's GDP could be 5 times what it is. If you're in a high-rise downtown, you look west and south, you look at all the stunted development that happens because of violence. If I'm a woman, I'm not running in the park at night. That means I'm getting diabetes at a younger age. We're paying for it. We're paying for failure, right? I'm really amazed, because I'm not necessarily a capitalist, how capitalists lack imagination, what is so obvious. This should be so much their self-interest. We have 3 buildings being built downtown that each are $1 billion. What we're dealing with, the investment in us, are pennies. It is so much a victory. And then there's justice, right? I drive through West Garfield and Austin and back of the yards, and I'm ashamed as a human being. It hurts me. This is partially work of atonement.
Please go ahead, Billy.
I mentioned earlier, when you have 200,000 African Americans leaving the city, that's money that's just walking away. If you got people going down on Michigan Avenue robbing people, it's because they know that you ain't gonna get nothing but a link card in Englewood. You know, so it's no separation now. You know, people, if you don't invest in people, if you don't give people an opportunity to have an equal stake in where they live at and to have something meaningful, then anybody can become a victim. You know, it's not just isolated no more to the south side of Chicago and Englewood. You're hearing about people, you know, on the north side on the Gold Coast, you know, getting robbed and things like that. So, and I always think that the solution is always close to the problem. When you look at Chicago and people that's not from Chicago, the only thing they think about Chicago is this violent city. That has an effect over people coming to this city, people having any type of real interest in this city. And we know that that's not the case. There's only 0.3% of the people that we have identified that need the help the most who may be responsible for the violence. We have 77 communities in this city. Only 15 of these communities have been identified as having that problem. So this is not the story of Chicago. So the people that's living in these other communities should have an investment in how the narrative of this city is being told, because this doesn't define the city that we live in. This is one of the greatest cities in the world.
Any final thoughts?
Well, as we talked about the greatest city in the world, when I was coming up, I'd travel abroad and somebody would say, "You're where from Harold Washington is from," and we'd all get excited. Or somebody say, "You're the town where, you know, Michael Jordan is from." So yeah, to be called Chirac is no fun these days.
No.
We talked about relationship early on. When I have a relationship with my neighbor, then I care. When I humanize the stories that I'm talking about, then I care. When violence is not something that happens out there, but I recognize that it impacts my tax bracket, it impacts my quality of housing, it impacts my employment, it impacts my ability to transfer buses safely from one place to the next, then it becomes a me story, a we story. And I think as we are telling our stories in a way that we are shaping the narrative and putting a human face on the challenges and the problems and the barriers and the obstacles that we face, then immigration is not a problem out there for somebody else who is of, you know, Latin origin. Immigration is an issue for me because maybe I might have a Haitian cousin or a Nigerian brother-in-law. These are very real issues that we're all related to. Similarly, I might not have somebody in my family that went to prison, but I might know somebody or work next to somebody in a cubicle who does have somebody who might have gone to prison for a white-collar crime or mistaken identity, or I just happened to be in the car riding along and I had no idea that my friend from college was going to go inside and rob that bodega. So it's closer than we think. These problems that we're facing are in our own families, and when we begin to humanize those situations, shed a light on them in a way that it's not us and them, but it's us all together, and clearly when we start to bake a bigger pie, then I think we don't have to convince other people that they should care about it, but then they will want to care about it.
Well, we're all in this together, is what you're saying. Mm-hmm. George, final thought from you?
Yes, and I agree with everything that was said here, and I will share a quick story and end with that. So I have a good friend that I met in school 4 years ago. And she came from Philadelphia, moved to Jefferson Park, and we were in class talking about some of these issues. And I remember her telling me, "Oh, I live in Jefferson Park, nothing's gonna happen, I don't have to worry about anything." And, you know, I didn't know her that well, so we were just conversating in our little circle amongst each other for school. And 2 months later, her boyfriend got shot in Jefferson Park. And she came to me and she started asking me questions. And I remember one thing she said. She said, "You looked at me when I said that, and I didn't know why." And I'm asked, and she asked me like, well, now I know why. And I just said, hey, we have to all come together. That wasn't, when you said that, I was kind of skeptical, but I didn't know as much to push back. But I'm like, this is the city of Chicago. We all have to come together. And I think, like you just said, it's closer than we really think, right? And once we can see that and come all together, then I think we'll be in a better place.
So we had some wonderful questions here related to the role of block clubs and neighborhood associations in the work, about the role of Chicago Public Schools, and about how do you think about the youngest children, and how do you think about interacting with young people whose identity is even more formed. We're not going to have time for these terrific questions, but I want to say, I asked you what keeps you hopeful. I want to say that it's organizations like yours and individuals like you that keep me hopeful. And it's people like you in the audience who took the time to come here to continue to participate in this conversation and to support the kind of activities that each of you represents. So please join me in thanking this panel for a really thoughtful conversation.